All right. Good evening to those of you on the East Coast. Good afternoon to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for joining us wherever you're watching from, be it East Coast, West Coast, or any other part of the world. As you know, this weekend, as I mentioned a little earlier today, there is a con that's happening locally known as Otakon that I wanted to be able to get into. I did have one of our team members talking about it live from the show a little earlier today, but to kind of wrap up the show, I also wanted to bring on another team member as well, our Connoisseur, Mr. Chris Pabon, to reflect on the show. He was there for day one, so let me bring him on now. Hello, sir.
Hey, Brandon. Hello, everyone. Guten Abend. Buenas tardes a todos nuestros amables oyentes.
And I figured, Chris, just to kind of give a rundown for those of you that may not be familiar with the show, this Otakon is a show that uh, started in, I believe, 1994.
Yeah.
And it caters around Asian pop culture, so it runs the gamut with manga, with music, movies, what have you. And with that in mind, the last couple of years before it was happening in Baltimore. However, within the last few years, it has shifted over to DC, and so I wanted to get into the thoughts of now that is in DC, what the feel of it was. Now, obviously, if unless you've been living under a rock, that a lot has been going on in the world that has affected our ability to go to different shows. For those of you that are watching out there, so one thing that I wanted to touch on in having this retrospective is just getting an idea of a lot of these shows that are now resurfacing, and the new protocols that have been put in place in order to make sure that they're able to function smoothly and properly. So first, before we hop into all of those things, I wanted to get your sense, Chris, of your history, with the show, and what is it about Otakon with all the other cons that you have attended, because you've attended many, that really stands out and that you enjoy.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Baltimore's loss was Washington, D.C.'s gain when Otakon decided to come to Washington, D.C. So I've been coming to Otakon since about 2017, and I enjoy it immensely because it's a con dedicated exclusively to anime and manga. And if you're a person like me that has a lot of knowledge of like the DC, Marvel, and some of the other sci-fi franchises out there, it's a breath of fresh air to be at Otakon because the anime and manga universe is just so vast and it is so large that it is almost impossible to recognize everyone. So it's a joy when I can see a cosplay that I don't recognize. So like, wow, that means there's a story that I haven't read yet. So from that perspective, Otakon is always fresh, and I love being there. Um, Otakon traditionally happens in the summer. It is one of two large anime manga cons that we have in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. The other one being Katsucon, which is held at the Gaylord in February. And I just want to say there was a big hole in DC last year when Otakon, along with all the other cons, out of concern for the people who go to it, had to cancel. So it was with a lot of happiness that I made like the Red Guardian, took to my cosplay, and to quote him, still fits. And I was able to slip into it and head down to the convention center to enjoy day one of Otakon.
And I'll switch it over to that so that way we can see it. Bring it here. So this was the cosplay here. So are you able to comment on on what you were what you had put up here, and then I'll switch over to the actual photo.
Um, well, my first comment is thank God for waist pads. So I cosplayed Metal Bat from the manga One Punch Man. He is a member of the Heroes Association. He is a Class S hero. And in my picture, you'll see me with the main star of the manga, which is Saitama. He is One Punch Man
Oh
because,
yeah, yep.
as the name describes, it only takes him one punch to defeat anyone. And so for the rest of the heroes like myself, it takes an effort. I use a metal bat, hence my name. He only requires one punch, and he's a bit of a slacker, but yet somehow he's managed to climb up the ranks to Class B hero. And in the future, he may actually make it to Class A. But I was wandering around the hallways and I saw Saitama, and I'm like, all right, it's a time for a picture to show that the Heroes Association was present at Otakon.
Indeed. So with that that in mind, and talking about your history, with this con, just as I mentioned with Josh, I know that there were a couple of things that they put in place to obviously ensure not only the safety of the staff but also the attendees as well. And one of it is in lieu of the mask mandate that they did, and then also what they did with the temperature check. So could you comment on those two things that they had mentioned that they would be implementing?
Well, let me start off with the mask mandate, and everyone who was cosplaying was extremely responsible. Everyone who was there was extremely responsible, and everyone kept their masks on. The only time that I saw masks off were in the designated eating areas. And sometimes if you approach a cosplayer to take a picture, they would remove their mask then. Sometimes they didn't, and that was perfectly fine. So all of the attendees extremely responsible. As for the measures put in place by the con and the convention center, they had mentioned the temperature check device. I personally never saw it. I mean, I guess I had envisioned something like what you see in the airport that you walk through, like a scanner type deal. Maybe they had guns that I wasn't aware of that they just pointed at people, but I know the device was mentioned, but I never effectively saw it put into place at the entrance.
Gotcha. But no. I was just curious because I thought that that was awesome that they had that extra
Oh
extra
yeah, I mean,
measure that they
I
put
heard
in
about it. It's kind
place.
of great.
So and I was curious on how it went because they very much, if you look at the website, they had a very specific process that they spelled out on what they were going to do with it. Whether it was I think if I recall, it was if it crosses, then they placed a temperature that if it exceeded that amount, that it wouldn't be an automatic elimination where like we can't have you enter. They said that they want to allow some time to see if anything changed, to see if it was like any glitch on the part of the whatever the system was, and they would do a second attempt, and then at that point they would try to find out alternative measures or next steps, if you will, of how to still be able to accommodate the guests, but also let them know that perhaps maybe on this day you wouldn't be able to go, and if you only had a pass for certain days, maybe they would be able to speak with some of the folks on the team to determine like maybe if you wanted to do other things. They didn't get into specifics of what it is, but it was implied that they would work with you on whatever those circumstances were.
So,
Yeah.
to the best of my knowledge, I did not see the device implemented, but one difficulty I imagine that would have come into play using this was it was a really hot day on Friday, and even in the walk from the metro, I was in full cosplay.
August is in
The entrance,
December, or say December. August is in DCR, July and
right?
August.
So when I got into the convention center, it's possible that at the entrance I might have set off the alarm because I know I was feeling pretty hot in just that walk down there. And I want to say that the temperature checks of this device, whether it was employed or not, I mean, a good idea, at least in theory, but I really think it's no replacement for proof of vaccination. And I know that NostalgiaCon, which is happening in a couple of weeks, have implemented a system that if you want to gain entry, you have to show proof of vaccination. And then they will give you a very visible sticker that says you are vaccinated. And if you do not show proof, then you will be allowed inside, still wearing a mask, but you will not be given a sticker. So is that sort of like a scarlet letter? Perhaps. But I think that, a visible proof of vaccination is something that we need because it's indoors and it's like close quarters. And I'll talk a bit more about like what I saw inside the con, just to give you a comparison of pre-con and post. I mean, pre-COVID and post-COVID, but I still think proof of vaccination is something that is the best deterrent.
Definitely, and I feel like that's a good segue into the wins, if you will, as well as those things that you feel that, and obviously this is the first show back for them, so I'm sure that there are things that they maybe wish that they could have tweaked or done differently. But we can start first with the wins. I mean, most of them you've commented on already, but were there any other, additional like thoughts that you wanted to comment on in terms of the show and how it was executed?
Well, first of all, hats off to the convention center because they removed all the benches inside and they replaced them with single chairs, which thus prevents people from sitting together. So I think that's a big plus. I think that the convention organizers also should be praised because it was only one entrance onto the vendor floor and one entrance out. So that allowed for some organized flow of people. So, that was good. And the convention center also had separated areas for people to dine. And, the amount of chairs at each table were not the same. Like for 12 tops, you didn't have like 12 chairs. So there were reduced amounts of chairs at the tables. So that was very good. And I just want to say that perhaps the best thing of all is that we managed to have Otakon again because, there was a big hole come August in my personal calendar last year. So I'm glad to see it here. And, I think people were very grateful to be able to have a con to attend to. So those are some of the good. And so some of the room for improvement. Well, first of all, let me start by saying, if you build it, they will come, and people did come to Otakon. But the devil is in the details, so they never say how many people are going to come. It was definitely a smaller audience. If you go back to the picture of myself in cosplay with Saitama, you'll see it's a pretty empty hallway behind us. And, that hallway traditionally is completely full of people. So, yeah, there's some people, but it should be much fuller than that. So the attendance was a little bit less, which is, understandable. Some people are not completely comfortable yet with attending a con. And this just wasn't the attendees. I mean, from the merchant's room to the artist alley, you could see compared with before COVID, or at least I could, that there usually are many more vendors and artists. I mean, there were visible spaces where they had moved stuff closer together, but you could see a chunk of the room was still empty, whereas in pre-COVID, I mean, it would be packed with vendors. There were a bunch of Purell stations set up by the convention center all over the place. But, that depends on people actually using those. And I think that they could have taken some more preactive measures. For example, when I mentioned that there were less chairs at the tables in the designated eating areas, that was great. But there were still people moving the chairs to other tables to form larger groups. And you really needed some signs saying, like, limit, let's say, 4 people to a table or 6 people to a table. I mean, I understand they don't want to make the investment in a bunch of 2 tops, which would be ideal. So they're just rolling out the tables and chairs that they have at the convention center. But you really then need to put up signage saying, like, really people, only 4 or 6 people per table. And that way people are not, like, building table by simply moving the chairs from one table to another. I think it was a good idea to limit entrance to the merchant area one way and exit the other. But they really need to like put some rope up with some intervals so people can cross over throughout the long main hallway that connects all the different halls on the bottom floor, because people are still bumping into each other going, one way or another way. And, if you really want to limit the amount of people bumping into each other, you've got to have a controlled flow of people going one way and the other way. And the way to achieve that would be through like roping it off with areas where they can cross over to the other way. But, again, that's an investment. So who's going to make that investment in public safety? Is it going to be the convention center, or is it going to be the convention organizers? I mean, the convention organizers want to maximize the amount of money they can make. The convention organizers, and the convention center, to a certain extent, doesn't want to invest more money than they have to. So, neither party wants to make that investment. But for safety purposes, it would really help. And, the other thing, so I went to like one panel, and, the chairs are still together. The chairs need to be spaced out apart, or they need to start putting tape down on the chairs themselves so that people can't be sitting together. I mean, it's, you want people spaced out. You don't want people getting together. And it's kind of like a doctor's offices, right? Like when I go with my spouse to a doctor's office, I do want to sit with her, but they've roped off or taped up one chair, so we can't sit next to each other. And normally you think, well, why can't you? But it's for safety's purposes, because not everyone is like coupled up. And so you don't want someone sitting next to a stranger right now. So they need to do a much better job with that. And I think the other thing they needed was someone for if you needed an emergency mask. Like, we all use masks right now. It is not uncommon for something to snap. And unless you brought another mask, what were you going to do, right? They needed a very visible designated area that said, hey, if you need an emergency mask, come here.
Which is interesting too, because it kind of it goes into your point of expense, right? So that overhead expense of accommodating and providing that. So I think it kind of plays into what you were just commenting on in terms of having another added expense. And I mean, the truth of the matter is that with a lot of these shows, it's depending so much on the revenue that it generates year to year and how that can carry over or spill over into what they're able to do the next year by, not having a show for some cases. It may be, one show. For other cases, it may potentially end up turning into 2 consecutive shows. Those purses are getting, way tighter than they normally would. So maybe, just as you said, it's a necessary evil, or to say a necessary precaution that needs to be made in order to, ensure the how smoothly you're able to do the show. But, at the same time, with them being a business, you can get why it wasn't done. Is just that, you wish that it was done. So, no, I definitely get what you mean.
And the loss of revenue is not just on people like me attending. The loss of revenue is also less amount of vendors and artists attending, as I mentioned, which meant also like another revenue hit on that side. But, even that said, there are things that could be done a bit better. For example, on Friday morning, the room to pick up your badge was packed like Metro Center at 6:30 in the evening. There was definitely no social distancing there. And, I looked at that and I thought what they really should have done is they sort of had overflow rooms where people could just be sitting socially distant and then call them in deli style with a number. It worked in the 50s and 60s. Like, just because it's not fancy technology doesn't mean some of the basics still can't be applied to these circumstances. Like, issue numbers, tell people to wait in a room, and then you call the people in so they can come and get their badges. And that way you avoid, like, what I saw, which was just like definitely no social distancing those hours in the morning. Afterwards, when most of the people who were coming on Friday had already picked up their badge, yeah, I mean, it was empty, but I mean, it resembled a ride at Disney World. That's how it looked like.
Gotcha. And in talking about like the exceptions, obviously there are going to be exceptions in terms of when it, as you mentioned at the top, when it was all right or okay to not be required to wear your mask for obvious circumstances, in the places where you're eating. They also mentioned it, if I recall, I know you were talking about the panels, they were mentioning with that too. So the idea was, or what they had stated was that they, with their panelists, is that they would have them socially distance, but they would be able to not, they wouldn't be required to wear a mask. So that way that, so they would be able to, speak through the mics and be heard. So, I don't know. It's a tough, circumstance to be in. I'm not jealous of any, con organizer of all the logistics. I mean, under the most normal of circumstances, cons are such an undertaking, but to add all of this and to, still try to, do a show under, the circumstances that are going on now, I can't even imagine. I really can't.
No, very tough. But that's also why I have my eye on AwesomeCon, because as people who purchase tickets know, there's been a hefty surcharge for ensuring safety of attendees, for cleaning and whatnot. So I want to see. Otakon didn't have that. So to a certain extent, I am willing to give them a bit more of a pass because they didn't charge more for that. But now that AwesomeCon is charging people, I want to see what measures they're going to put in place, what visible measures. And it could be they hire more people to be spotters to ensure people are wearing their masks. One thing I also think could help AwesomeCon and could have helped Otakon is when you ascend the steps, when you go to like their atrium, which is all glass, which is an ideal place for taking pictures with cosplayers, just take some tape and section off areas near the window to say this is your designated spot for taking cosplay pictures, and have someone rotating people in and out of the designated area. Because what is happening right now, and also happens at AwesomeCon, is that you have large groups of photographers who may or may not have purchased a ticket for AwesomeCon, just taking pictures there, and there's no designated area. So if you can have designated areas, just take a piece of tape, section it off and say this is the area next to the windows, and then that frees up the middle so people can walk through unimpeded. That would be a big help.
For sure. And actually, that's a great segue. You're talking about all the things that you felt were great, and even the things that you felt could be tweaked. No show is perfect. But in wrapping all of those thoughts up into your thoughts just overall, what would you say about, being able to come back to the show and having it return?
Hey, they pulled it off. I am thankful for the organizers who, as you mentioned, this is no small task. I would have paid a little bit more if they had asked for it, just for safety conditions to improve them. But I want to say that at no point on Friday did I feel unsafe. I mean, it was very relaxed, and credit to all the people who were there, that they're incredibly responsible. And people were not coming up and hugging each other or anything. I liked how some of the vendors had signs that no mask, no service. Everyone stuck to the basic tenet for being all of us safe, which was they masked up. Everyone who attended, in my book, is a superhero because they wore masks, they stuck to the protocols, and they ensured that we had a smooth Friday, which had led into a Saturday, which is going to lead into our Sunday. So it was a collaborative effort between the organizers, who I thank for putting this together somehow, some way, and also the people who attended, which justified the faith of the organizers. Because let's face it, I mean, you can pull something together, you can set down some guidelines, but as we have seen with people flying these days, I mean, not everyone respects the guidelines of the rules, and everyone did, as far as I could see, to the best of my knowledge, at Otakon. So, the attendees rewarded the faith of the organizers, and it takes two to tango, and I think this was a beautiful dance on Friday, and it's going to continue being a beautiful dance throughout the weekend.
For sure, for sure. So with that in mind, as always, Chris, thanks so much for carving out some time and talking about the con. Before I let you go, man, as always, can you tell folks where they can find you?
Absolutely. Look for my cosplay pictures on Instagram at Verde Cosplay, and look for me also on Flickr. You can find me by using my email, Verde Writer, and come to the cons. It's safer than you might think, and the con organizers need you so that we can have a con next year.
Indeed, indeed. So with that being said, guys, again, I'm your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. Thanks so much for joining us for this retrospective with Chris. You can find me at Brandon Choi ENT, which you see down below, at Brandon Choi _ENT on Instagram. And of course, you can find either of our work on Movers and Shakers Unlimited at Move and Shake UNLTD. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
And one last shameless plug: if anyone wants to
Go
come,
for it. Yeah.
Learn who is worthy of lifting Mjolnir's hammer on Friday of AwesomeCon at 5:30 in room 143. I and a Class A team of people with knowledge of anime, comic books, science fiction will be present to explain who outside the Marvel Universe would be worthy of lifting Thor's hammer. Come join us.
And also, with that being said, glad you brought that up. There may be some other surprises in store if you really care to watch this panel. We will keep you posted as we get closer to the show. But that's all I'll say. Just a little tease there. So should be fun. But yes, you can also find either of our respective work on moversandshakers.unlimited.com as well. Check out a lot of Chris's post there about other shows. And other than that, thanks so much for watching. Be safe out there, guys, and see you soon. Bye.